The courtroom was hushed, the echo of the gavel still ringing as the verdict cut through the air like a blade. Clutched the edge of the bench, breath caught between disbelief and fury. Somewhere, the warm Daniel Hayes' calm voice whispered hollow reassurances, words that only deepened the ache. Jake Miller pressed forward from the back, eyes burning with the weight of truths no one was ready to hear. The steady anchor sat still, hands folded, betraying nothing, while the velvet blade observed with the faintest trace of satisfaction. A phone buzzed in the silence, its vibration louder than thunder, and the survivor's face drained as if struck by lightning. Justice had just taken a shape no one could trust, and vengeance lingered like smoke in the air, waiting for someone brave or broken enough to claim it. The silence cracked when the survivor stumbled into the courthouse hallway, the world beyond seeming colder than ever. The Daniel Hayes followed with heavy steps, his words soothing but unable to erase the verdict's sting. The fire starter leaned against the wall, eyes sharp, his restless posture radiating the urgency of what he carried. The anchor lingered near the exit, watchful, as if already anticipating a storm. The blade walked slowly past, every step deliberate, her presence alone a reminder that the truth was never simple. Outside, the night roared with sirens and thunder, the city itself echoing their fractured hearts. A sudden clap of thunder made the survivor flinch, and she pressed her back to the wall, breath trembling as memories rushed unbidden. The fire starter muttered with impatience, his tone sharp, as though daring the others to act. The Daniel Hayes tried again, voice heavy with patience, yet his words barely touched the storm inside. The anchor quietly studied their faces, searching for cracks, while the blade stood in stillness, the faintest smile playing as though she alone knew the script unfolding. Outside, rain fell harder, drowning out the sound of their fractured voices. The hallway's echoes carried the fire starter's challenge, his voice raised against the silence, demanding truths no one dared speak. The survivor's face hardened as if sculpted by grief into resolve. The Daniel Hayes reached out, his hand lingering just shy of hers, offering warmth without force. The anchor's presence remained steady, but the stillness felt dangerous, as though restraint hid a storm. The blade's eyes flickered toward the survivor, gaze sharp as a dagger's edge, and for a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath. A distant door slammed, jolting all into silence. The survivor straightened, her eyes narrowing as determination replaced fear. The Daniel Hayes' calm faltered, his voice tightening as though carrying truths he dared not confess. The fire starter smirked bitterly, his energy rising like sparks before a fire. The anchor remained unreadable, but a faint shadow passed across his face, hinting at secrets long buried. The blade turned her head slowly, her composed presence a reminder that control had always been hers, and in that stillness the storm began to take shape. The rain had slowed, but the storm inside them was far from over. The survivor paced the dim corridor, each step echoing the weight of choices yet to come. The Daniel Hayes words trailed like threads, weaving calm that failed to mend the cracks. The fire starter's sharp questions sliced through silence, daring truths into light. The anchor stayed close, his steady gaze grounding the space, though shadows of doubt clung to his stillness. The blade, ever watchful, lingered at the edges, her silence heavier than any spoken word. The night pressed against the courthouse glass, reflecting fractured faces, searching for answers they could not yet name. The survivor's voice cracked, not with weakness, but with a weight no verdict could ease. The fire starter pressed closer, demanding truths, his voice too fierce for such silence. The Daniel Hayes interjected softly, his calm meant to bind but fraying at the edges. The anchor's steady tone carried reason, yet beneath it lay old choices that could fracture trust anew. The blade's measured glance cut through them all, her silence shaping fear more than words ever could. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one pulling them into its center. The fire starter's words struck like sparks, reigniting wounds the survivor tried to bury. She turned, her eyes alight with grief made steel, and for the first time the Daniel Hayes faltered. His voice wavered as though truths weighed on his tongue, unspoken yet suffocating. The anchor's gaze shifted, a subtle crack in his calm revealing storms of his own. The blade's lips curved faintly, satisfaction hidden in her composure. Beyond the glass, lightning split the night sky, as though the heavens mirrored the fracture forming within them. The Daniel Hayes reached out, his hand brushing air rather than touch, his words thick with promises too fragile to trust. The survivor turned away, her silence sharper than refusal. The fire starter scoffed, pacing with restless energy, his defiance sparking against their restraint. The anchor moved subtly closer, his presence heavy with loyalty that concealed a fracture beneath. The blade stepped into light, her gaze locking with the survivors, a silent challenge echoing louder than thunder. In that moment, every unspoken truth threatened to break the fragile balance. The storm broke in silence rather than sound. The survivor lifted her head, her breath steady now, as though deciding something unspoken. The Daniel Hayes calm fractured into urgency, words spilling faster than before. The fire starter's smirk widened, knowing his sparks had found dry tinder. The anchor's stillness wavered, eyes tightening with a hidden history clawing to surface. The blade stood motionless, her composure intact, her silence louder than thunder. And in that shared stillness, each of them felt it. The trial was far from over, and the true test had just begun. The courthouse basement echoed with dripping water and the hum of failing lights, a stark contrast to the thunder above. The survivor's voice shook as she whispered the question none had dared to ask, her words pressing against silence like a fragile blade. The Daniel Hayes answered with a calm he no longer fully carried, his tone a thread fraying under the weight of his own history. The firestarter sneered, restless energy bouncing off the concrete walls, demanding action rather than hollow promises. The anchor kept to the shadows, his silence far more dangerous than words, while his eyes followed every movement with quiet calculation. The blade stood still, her figure outlined by flickering light, her presence like a ghost of control that refused to fade. The storm outside howled, but inside, the greater storm was gathering, twisting every breath into the promise of betrayal. The survivor's voice hardened, her words no longer trembling, but cutting with a truth buried too long. The firestarter lunged forward, shouting accusations that rattled against stone, his passion searing through the stale air. The Daniel Hayes stepped between them, hands raised in calm, but his hesitation betrayed him, each pause dripping with secrets unspoken. The anchor shifted, his solid frame blocking the only way out, his silence echoing like a threat unvoiced. The blade's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes glinting with satisfaction at the chaos unfolding exactly as she had foreseen. The storm surged above, but the greater violence was inside, where trust cracked with every word, and betrayal waited like a blade in the dark. The survivor demanded answers, her voice steady now, the pain in her eyes sharpened into demand. The Daniel Hayes faltered, stumbling on half-truths, each word falling weaker than the last. The firestarter smirked bitterly, his tone sharp, cutting deeper with every accusation. The anchor's jaw tightened, his silence screaming with more weight than speech. The blade leaned closer, her whisper soft yet venomous, twisting the moment with precision. Lightning cracked outside, its glow flashing across their faces, illuminating fear, anger, and betrayal in one brutal stroke. The storm's voice mingled with theirs, as though the world itself bore witness to a fracture beyond repair. The survivor stepped forward, her resolve turning the silence into a weapon sharper than the firestarter's fury. The Daniel Hayes pleaded softly, his voice trembling, torn between loyalty and truth. The firestarter laughed bitterly, daring them all to face what they feared. The anchor's stillness broke as he stepped into the faint light, his presence dominating the space with a warning too clear to ignore. The blade's gaze swept across them, her silence heavier than thunder, her poise unbroken by their unraveling. The air thickened with tension, and the flickering lights dimmed further, as though the building itself recoiled from the truths that threatened to break free. The basement fell into silence, broken only by the storm above. The survivor's breath steadied, her decision forming in the quiet, a choice that could shatter or bind them. The Daniel Hayes' eyes dropped, shame thick in his silence, words caught in a cage of guilt. The fire starter's glare burned, his energy restless, demanding action he alone could not force. The anchor shifted once more, his presence a wall, his loyalty suddenly unclear. The blade remained untouched, her calm presence a knife against their chaos. In that fragile balance the truth became a living thing, pulsing between them, waiting for someone to seize it and unleash the fire that had only just begun to rise. The basement doors groaned as they opened into a records room lined with dust and shadows. The survivor's breath quickened when her eyes caught files long buried, names she had tried to forget. The fire starter snatched one, waving it like a torch, daring the silence to deny what was written. The Daniel Hayes' voice wavered as he urged restraint, but his shaking hands betrayed knowledge deeper than he admitted. The anchor stepped forward, his presence now heavy with secrets too large to contain. The blade smiled faintly, the kind of smile that told them she had been waiting for this very unraveling all along. The survivor demanded answers, her voice trembling with fury and disbelief. The firestarter shoved the file toward her, shouting that the truth was in her hands, not hidden in shadows. The Daniel Hayes reached out, pleading for calm, but his eyes betrayed recognition of every word written. The anchor's silence deepened, his broad stance suddenly a wall between them and the exit. The blade tilted her head, her gaze steady, as though confirming every suspicion without saying a word. The air thickened, as if even the walls recoiled from the secrets exposed. The file slipped from trembling hands, papers scattering across the floor like broken truths. The survivor stared at the words etched in ink, her past rewritten by betrayal she had not dared imagine. The firestarter smirked bitterly, declaring he had always known lies festered in silence. The Daniel Hayes sank into a chair, hands pressed to his face, voice cracking as he confessed his part in keeping the truth hidden. The anchor finally spoke, his words slow, heavy, and damning, revealing he had chosen loyalty to power over loyalty to her. The blade's silence thundered louder than all of them, her gaze steady and satisfied. The survivor's grief turned to fire, her voice breaking as she demanded why they had chosen silence over truth. The firestarter shouted in her defense, fury raw, his anger filling the room with sparks of defiance. The Daniel Hayes whispered apologies, words spilling out as though trying to patch wounds with paper. The anchor's voice grew louder, his confession twisting the air, every sentence unraveling the trust once built. The blade stepped forward at last, her calm words cutting deeper than any shout, revealing she had been part of the wound all along. In that moment, the truth no longer fractured them, it destroyed them. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. The survivor's heart pounded, the truth pressing into her like a wound that would never heal. The firestarter stood ready to act, his energy reckless and fierce, but his eyes turned to her for direction. The Daniel Hayes broke down, his calm shattered, guilt spilling into the dust-filled air like ash. The anchor's presence loomed, no longer steady but dangerous, a reminder of betrayal too close to bear. The blade stood at the center now, her victory silent, her gaze holding them all in her grip. For the first time the choice was clear. Justice was no longer about truth but survival. The courtroom was nearly empty, the echoes of footsteps fading as they faced one another. The survivor stood at the center, her voice no longer trembling but forged from pain into steel. The firestarter demanded they choose now, his defiance loud enough to shake the silence. The Daniel Hayes pleaded for reason, his words torn between guilt and desperate hope. The anchor loomed with a confession waiting on his tongue, his stillness heavy with betrayal. The blade stepped forward, her calm slicing through their chaos, her control unbearable. The storm outside pounded against the glass, but the real storm waited in their choice, justice or revenge. The survivor's voice rose, echoing through the hollow chamber, declaring the truth could not stay buried. The firestarter grinned bitterly, daring her to choose vengeance and let fire cleanse the lies. The Daniel Hayes broke, admitting his silence had never been kindness but weakness. The anchor's words fell like stone, his loyalty revealed as betrayal disguised as protection. The blade smiled thinly, her eyes gleaming, knowing she had guided every fracture to this breaking point. The world beyond the storm blurred, but here, every truth stood naked and sharp. The survivor turned on the anchor, her voice cutting like a blade as she demanded why he had chosen silence. His confession spilled slowly, each word heavier than the last, revealing loyalty traded for survival. The firestarter's fury exploded, his voice raw as he swore justice had to be seized by their own hands. The Daniel Hayes begged them to stop, tears streaking his face, his calm shattered beyond repair. The blade's silence lingered, her smile widening, the architect of pain revealed not through words but through presence. Thunder shook the walls as the trial of truth reached its peak. The firestarter surged forward, his anger unstoppable, his words promising vengeance no court could give. The survivor caught his arm, her grip trembling but strong, her choice hovering between justice and ruin. The Daniel Hayes begged for restraint, his voice trembling with desperation, his guilt laid bare. The anchor stared at them, his silence finally broken by the weight of his betrayal, each word twisting the knife deeper. The blade stepped closer, whispering poison into the silence, her presence urging the survivor toward the abyss. Lightning struck, the chamber shaking, as if the world demanded an answer. The moment stretched into eternity, every breath a battle between what was owed and what was deserved. The survivor raised her voice above thunder, declaring she would not let vengeance consume her. The firestarter's fury broke into silence, his eyes burning with betrayal and grief. The Daniel Hayes collapsed to the floor, his guilt pouring out in tears. The anchor lowered his head, the weight of his choices crushing him. The blade smiled coldly, her silence triumphant, for though the choice had been made, the scars it left would never heal. Justice had been claimed, but at a cost none could escape. The storm outside had weakened, but inside the courtroom its shadow lingered. The survivor stood motionless, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of her choice. The firestarter turned away, his silence sharper than his anger, his trust fractured beyond repair. The Daniel Hayes sat slumped against the bench, his tears staining the wood, guilt his only companion. The anchor lingered near the door, the strength he once carried now hollow, his betrayal etched into every breath. The blade remained untouched, her calm posture mocking them all, her silence a cruel reminder that even in loss she had won something greater. The survivor spoke of justice, her words trembling not with doubt, but with the grief of knowing it could never heal what had been broken. The firestarter muttered under his breath, his voice bitter, his spirit still clawing for vengeance. The Daniel Hayes whispered apologies that no one heard, his voice swallowed by the emptiness. The anchor straightened, but his eyes betrayed the cracks in his strength, his loyalty forever tainted. The blade only smiled faintly, her victory sealed not in triumph, but in the wounds she had left behind. The silence deepened as they stepped into the open air, the city washed clean by the storm. The survivor inhaled sharply, the weight of truth pressing heavier than the rain. The firestarter's eyes burned as he walked ahead, distance his only defense against betrayal. The Daniel Hayes stumbled behind, his guilt dragging him lower with every step. The anchor remained close but not trusted, his presence tolerated only by necessity. The blade lingered at the threshold, her calm figure framed in the courthouse light, a shadow that promised her story was far from over. The survivor paused at the street's edge, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as though searching for a future beyond broken truths. The firestarter stopped too, his voice low but sharp, asking if justice without vengeance was still justice at all. The Daniel Hayes shook his head, his words drowned by guilt, knowing his silence had destroyed more than it had ever saved. The anchor spoke at last, his voice hoarse, swearing loyalty once more, though no one believed him. The blade's laughter, quiet and sharp, slipped into the air like a knife, reminding them that power had never left her grasp. As the city stirred awake, their paths began to diverge. The survivor walked forward, carrying both justice and scars, her strength unbroken yet haunted. The firestarter stayed behind, his glare sharp, his silence a vow of vengeance yet to come. The Daniel Hayes sat on the courthouse steps, his body hunched, his shame refusing to let him rise. The anchor remained close, but no longer trusted, his presence tolerated only in shadow. The blade turned away, her figure slipping into the dawn, her silence promising her influence was far from finished. The storm had ended, but its echo would never fade. The courthouse stood silent in the gray morning, its cracked walls still glistening with the memory of rain. Emma Clarke lingered on the steps, her breath even but heavy, her eyes reflecting the cost of every truth uncovered. Jake Miller stood apart, his silence burning hotter than his anger, his gaze fixed on the horizon like a vow unspoken. Daniel Hayes avoided their eyes, his calm long shattered, his body folded into itself as though carrying the weight of 1,000 apologies. Mark Sullivan leaned against the cold stone, his strength gone, his frame now little more than a monument to broken loyalty. At the far end of the street, Victoria Steele paused, her silhouette razor sharp against the rising sun. She did not need words, her stillness was enough to declare victory. The air was quiet, but beneath that silence lay an echo of choices that would never be undone. Emma Clarke spoke softly, her words meant only for herself, yet they carried across the courtyard like a vow carved into stone. She swore justice would not end here, that wounds could not erase the truth. Jake Miller let out a bitter laugh, one sharp sound breaking the silence, his voice heavy with grief, disguised as defiance. Daniel Hayes whispered another apology, but the sound faltered as though even he no longer believed the words. Mark Sullivan turned away, his jaw tight, his silence proof of guilt too deep to wash away. Victoria Steele glanced back, her smirk faint but deliberate, her eyes cold with knowing. The storm had passed, but the weight of its destruction clung to them. Each stood apart, yet the invisible threads between them pulled tighter, binding them to what had been revealed, and to the scars it left behind. The city stirred awake, unaware of the storm that had torn through lives within its courthouse walls. Emma Clarke stepped into the street, her pace firm, though every movement carried the gravity of scars she would never shed. Jake Miller followed slowly, his silence no longer empty, but sharpened into a blade he carried in his heart, a vow that vengeance could not be silenced. Daniel Hayes remained behind, his body heavy, his head lowered, his guilt an anchor that chained him to the stone steps. Mark Sullivan trailed at a distance, tolerated but no longer trusted, his silence betraying him more than words ever could. Victoria Steele vanished into the crowd, her dark figure dissolving into ordinary life, yet her shadow lingered, her calm presence more haunting in absence than in presence. The storm might have ended, but the echoes of its judgment pulsed like blood in every vein. Emma Clarke halted suddenly, her gaze fixed on a shadow across the intersection, lingering unnaturally as dawn brightened. Jake Miller stopped too, narrowing his eyes as though sensing a truth still hidden. Daniel Hayes did not look, his shoulders sagging as if he bore the weight of every silence. Mark Sullivan froze, his eyes flickering downward, guilt burning across his face. Victoria Steele was gone, yet her presence clung to the air, invisible but undeniable, like smoke that refuses to disperse. Emma's whisper broke the silence, quiet but heavy. Justice was never the end, only the beginning. Her words traveled outward like thunder, echoing across the waking city. The others did not respond, but the truth bound them together in a silence more powerful than speech. The city moved forward, but Emma Clarke and the others could not. Her whisper lingered across the morning air, etched into their silence like a scar that time would not erase. Jake Miller turned his face toward the rising sun, his silence sharpened into a blade of defiance. Daniel Hayes remained behind, his body hunched in shadow, his guilt an unbroken prison. Mark Sullivan stood stiff, weighed down by betrayal that no redemption could cleanse. And somewhere unseen, Victoria Steele's voice lingered like memory, cruel and precise, reminding them that truth never dies, it mutates, poisons, and endures. The courthouse faded into light as the city carried on, but for them the story was unfinished. It closed not with peace, not even with vengeance, but with a single unanswerable question: had justice ever been theirs to claim, or had it always belonged to someone else?